Hello gamers, Isaac here. This was originally supposed to be another video, but I realized with the recent-ish release of Civ 7, now is pretty much the only time I can talk about a Civilization game and have people actually bother to listen. I've loved the Civ series since before I can remember, and by that I mean my dad would play Civ 7 on the home computer with infant me in his lap. Although, shockingly, I've kind of buried my head regarding Civ 7, but from what I've seen, the hate seems kind of over the top. But enough about that other stuff. Let's talk about Beyond Earth, a spin-off that flips the series' usual formula of alt history on its head by putting you in the future on exoplanets. It's technically the spiritual successor to another game in the series called Alpha Centauri, but that was released in '99 and looks like this. The games are so radically different that the only real similarity between them is that they both take place in the future on alien planets, so this is the only time I'll mention it. If this is your first time seeing the Civilization series, don't worry. I'll explain everything independent of the other games, besides a couple jokes I might make referencing the other games. I always say the Civilization series is like a gateway drug into grand strategy games, because it's relatively simple compared to other games like Hearts of Iron. I know I make a huge deal about game communities, but I'm gonna break my #1 rule and pay it no mind. I've only played like 3 online games in my entire life, and I've never sought out the opinion of people in the community. But from what I've heard, this game was super polarizing. A good parallel is Fallout New Vegas. Both games are spin-offs using the same engine of a previous game, and there seems to be only 2 opinions about them. Either that it and the people who like it are a horrid parasitic infestation on the community, or that it's the best game in the series that has and ever will exist. And well, I often find myself having 24 karat runs of bad luck. It may seem strange to talk about the lore as the first thing in this video, but it's such a nothing burger, I figured I'd get it out of the way first. The Civilization games have obviously never had any lore, cause, you know, history. The dev team tried to quickly throw together some story and background lore, and to be honest, it's the weakest part of the game. It feels like one of those bland sci-fi books you had to read in middle school. Like, the whole intro cinematic can just be summed up as Earth uninhabitable, we go to exoplanets. You can tell it's fiction because it's not just rich people going on those ships. You can get some lore in the flavor text of unit and building descriptions, but it's not that memorable. The only other way to see the lore are the loading screens, which I really can't find something to complain about. They all have this really cool art and an anecdote about the leader, sponsor you're playing as, so you can get an idea of who they are, which will always be cooler than just directly explaining everything. The Civilizations have the borderline racist lore of being entire continents smashed together, like, oh, this guy's interesting. Where's he from? Africa. Well, Africa's a pretty big continent with a bunch of different cultures. He's an African. From Africa. There were definitely some attempts to make something more significant lore-wise, but they all fell flat. With all that being said, take this section with a grain of salt, well, besides maybe the racism part. The lore doesn't have any effect on gameplay, and the main reason I added this part was so I could call this video a review, and not just pure glazing. Once you're at the main menu, wow, that really dates this game. And select Startup Game, because only the lowest of humanity uses Quick Game. You get to the colony setup after some basic game settings. In the other Civilization games, everything was already picked out for you based on your leader, but since this game is fiction, there's a lot more wiggle room, so you can pick and choose what bonuses you get. The first choice is your leader, which are called sponsors in this game. This will also determine your city names and UI color. I'm not here to give some meta guide on the best sponsor, just know that some have direct benefits and some have ones that need to be used properly. Before we move on to the other choices, we have to talk about another game. Sid Meier's Starships is a whole other can of worms, and frankly deserves an entire video about it. I'm pretty sure I'm one of like 5 people who know about this game's existence. What's important to this video though, is that these 2 games are extremely intertwined. They are sold in a bundle, they both follow the same shallow lore, and there's even a button in the menu exclusively for launching starships. Where this matters is that in 2014, when both these games came out, cross-platform progression was the thing, and there's stuff in Beyond Earth that you can only get by doing stuff in starships. One small problem, my 2K stopped supporting this a while ago, so there shouldn't be any way to get these. Well, turns out it's really easy to just go into the code and tell it that you have them unlocked. Like, trivially easy. Like, I'm gonna speedrun explaining how to. Open up File Explorer, go to this PC, select the drive it's on, program files x86, Steam, Steam Apps, Common, Beyond Earth, Assets, Gameplay, XML, Civilizations, open CivPE, Cargo, and Notepad, find these 2 row types, delete the lines that say for X live unlock key, but be sure to keep the closing tab, and do that again for the other 2 in colonists and spacecraft. There! Done. Alright, no more distractions. The rest of the options are framed as what you're bringing onto the ship to the planet, which is a really nice touch. The final thing you get to choose is what exoplanet you're going to be playing on, and this is one of the parts where I think the game really shines. While they could get a little wacky, the other maps in Civilization games had to follow the rules of Earth. But in this game, it does whatever. You want a tidally locked planet where the north is a frozen wasteland and the south a blistering desert? How about an ocean planet with a bunch of islands? Or the other way around with a huge Pangean landmass? There's that and much more available. But if you want something more normal, there's stuff like Kelper 186F and unnamed Earth-like continental exoplanet. When you start... Shut up, I'm the one giving advice here. In the other Civ games you start as a bunch of hobos with a donkey. But in this game you start like this. What do I do? Well, where do you want your city? Probably over there by those exploitable resources. Never gets old. Before I talk about all this other stuff, let's talk about the top bar first, but leaving some stuff out to stop this video from being super front-loaded. Starting off, you have your energy reserve and income. It may seem weird how it's quantified, but it's like this because it's just a reskin of the money from Civ 5. Do with that information as you will. Pretty much everything in the game, from buildings to improvements and units, use it for maintenance, and there are also certain actions that require immediate use of built-up energy. Next, there's health, which is why overpopulation is so serious. While certain improvements can decrease health, the main decreases to health are cities and population. High health gives some bonuses, but negative health can cripple pretty much everything. Now, I'm going to describe how your first couple games are going to go. Early game, you'll completely ignore it because you have enough starting health to not worry about it. Mid game, you'll enter a health death spiral where everything slows down and everything you do seems to make it worse. And end game, you'll have so many technologies unlocked that health is trivial. Next, you have strategic resources, which are used for producing advanced units and buildings. You can only get them from deposits or trade deals. Strategic resources work in Civ games a bit differently than in other grand strategy games. First of all, there's a lot less than you may think, and they also function on a reservation basis. By that I mean, if I have 20 of this resource called floatstone and build a lev tank, it reserves 3, but the moment that tank is disbanded or destroyed, that floatstone is immediately freed up. This can also lead to having negative of a resource if you build something with a resource and the trade deal giving you it expires. The last thing I want to talk about on the top bar right now is the Civilopedia, a built-in fandom that I think every game should have. Looking at the actual map, you have your city and starting units depending on what you chose. The first unit is the Explorer, which fills both the Scout and Archaeologist role. There are these archaeological sites you could analyze with frankly the coolest animation in the game, but for now, just use it to get rid of that fog of war. You control units with the card on the bottom left. This has a list of actions for the selected unit, and also unit stats like combat strength, which is pretty low for the Explorer, being just a dude with a rifle, and also movement, which is how many tiles the unit can move in a turn. Oh yeah, I guess I've been taking your knowledge of this for granted, but Civilization is a turn-based game on a map made of hexagonal tiles. So like chess, but not at all. Even though the Explorer has 2 movement points, you might notice that you can only move once on certain tiles. This is because tiles have features that take extra movement points to forward, and we're in the middle of a forest. To combat our rival, the ecosystem, you have your worker, a very aliens-inspired design with modular arms that can be outfitted for pretty much any task and forms the backbone of your entire economy. Right now it can be used to start clearing the forest, which will also give some bonus production. What's the matter, Civ 6 boy? You thought it'd be instant? I've boiled what it can do down to 3 categories: Earthworks, Improvements, and Exploitation. Starting with Earthworks, you've seen before that it clears forests, but can also clear other obstacles like marches, and with the right technology, toxic alien miasma. It can also build roads, which provide a huge movement boost, and will give a city bonus income if it's connected to your capital city by road. If a road goes over a river, it puts a bridge there that negates the movement penalty of fording it. Next are Improvements, that are a major improvement over the other games. In the other Civ games, you just have farms and mines on hills. In Beyond Earth, there are so much more, with improvements for every resource like generators, academies, manufactories, and more. Some improvements can also provide other bonuses like the node that heals adjacent units. On top of that, you can research technologies that upgrade them. Finally, there's Exploitation, which, like improvements, needs to be built inside your borders. As I mentioned before, these can be built on resource tiles to gain strategic resource, although there are also non-strategic resource tiles, like this fruit that doesn't give you anything, but allows you to build a plantation on it, which is like a better version of the farm. Anyway, early game, you should just be setting up industry and exploring the Oh, hi. As you can tell, Beyond Earth makes some pretty big changes to the core gameplay of Civilization, and the aliens are probably the third biggest change. They replace the barbarians as a constant threat that makes you invest in military even if you're not at war. The difference is that the aliens have a hive mind and actual intelligence with different ways they respond to your actions, and even primitive diplomacy. Aliens spawn from nests, which spawn on miasma-covered strategic resource nodes, giving you an incentive to destroy them. Aliens focus mainly on defending their nests at all costs, and will only go out to attack you if sufficiently enraged. Speaking of that, there's an alien alien opinion mechanic with different stages. Right now they're green, which means curious but cautious, where they won't attack you outright, but will respond if you do anything they conceive as threatening their hive, and ending your turn with the explorer right next to them is probably not the best idea. After you've taken out a couple nests, the hive mind recognizes you as a major threat and will even begin attacking your territory. Finally, there's red, where it's on sight. There's also an opinion level higher than green. Yeah, coexistence with these guys is completely possible, with the proper prerequisites. And since YouTube Studio tells me that most of you are over the age of 14, that's pretty cool. Individual hives also have their own systems, where the more threatened they feel, the more powerful forms they spawn. There's also 2 colossal aliens who spawn independent of hives and roam around the map. The final and probably controversial change is that their stats don't scale whatsoever, meaning early game, they're a major threat but are complete pushovers late game. I can see points for and against this. On one hand, it's a really cool indication of how you've mastered the environment late game, but on the other hand, it can lead to situations like this, where I started too close to a hive, which made every turn a desperate holding of the line, causing my economic growth to be stunted for the rest of the game. Yields are non-resource incomes that are essential for your civilization to function, like energy, which I already talked about. Yields are gathered on a city basis, which you can see by clicking on the city to open the information screen. Here you can also set citizens to work specific tiles to get their yields, by either setting a focus or manually selecting the tiles. I don't have much to say about this because I barely use it. The cities usually manage themselves pretty well, and the only time I really use it is setting to focus on production if I need to build something quickly. Speaking of, production is used by cities to produce units, buildings, and wonders. The thing you want to produce has a set production cost and will be completed in the amount of turns it takes to gather enough production. In simpler terms, the more production income, the faster things are built. Speaking of buildings, these are built in cities and provide yields, defensive stats, and various city bonuses. Unlike other grand strategy games, the amount of buildings you can build in a city is unlimited, but you can only build one of each per city. City roll is still important though due to production time, so prioritizing defensive structures in frontline cities, for example. Certain buildings give bonuses for resources in their borders, but that's not to be confused with buildings that need resources to be built. There are also wonders where only one of each can be built in the game, and they give great bonuses either empire-wide or to a single city. And you can also see some of them around a city, which will always be cool. The last thing you can do with production is developments, which have an infinite production cost and turn it directly into other yields. This can be used to stem the bleeding of energy, or if there isn't anything left to build, boost something like science. Science works similar to production, with you selecting a technology with a set science cost and your income determining how long it takes to finish. It departs from the traditional civ tech tree with, this. I can see why they decided to make it non-linear. While the other Civ games go throughout human history, Beyond Earth is set in the future, so it's a lot more open-ended. Another addition are leaf technologies, which are similar technologies that can be researched after a primary technology. Most of the time this mechanic makes sense, like with chemistry that unlocks oil, having biochemistry which unlocks a petrochemical plant allowing you to use said oil. But other times they just feel like artificial roadblocks from getting you to the cool endgame stuff. This is probably really confusing to new players. Yeah, there's no real way around this. It's probably going to take you a couple games to get the hang of it. The only real advice I can give is that you're not at all expected to research every technology. Like, if you don't have any xenomass or don't really want to use it, then don't even bother with alien sciences or even the entire right side. The final yield is culture, which works a little different. All culture income goes into this indicator on the top bar, and once you get enough, you can choose a virtue. Virtues are powerful perks that you choose from 4 trees. Early game, I would suggest getting prosperity virtues first for their growth bonuses and free civilian units, but if you're having a lot of problems with the locals, it's good to go for survivalism and scavenging in the might tree. The first unit you'll ever get is probably the Humble Soldier, a well-rounded melee unit. Yes, you heard me correctly, melee. It's a relic of the other games, but all it means is that it can only attack units in the tile adjacent to it and takes damage while attacking. Speaking of, I want to revisit the unit controls. There's an attack command, but it's literally useless because it automatically attacks if you move onto a tile with an enemy on it. Before attacking, it will show you in the bottom right the results in modifiers. If you're wondering what terrain advantage means, tile features that slow unit movement also grant a defensive bonus to the unit on them. By the way, you can hold right click and release on a tile to move there, which is much less of a hassle than pressing the move button every time. There's also the skip button, which puts the unit to sleep for a turn, meaning you won't get that unit needs orders pop-up for them. Another thing that puts them to sleep is fortify, which makes them sleep until you give them an order. While fortifying, units gain a bonus to defensive strength, meaning that they take less damage and deal more to attacking melee units. On top of that, they also heal a bit of health every turn, with this handy order to fortify until their health is at full, or alert, which fortifies until a hostile unit is detected nearby. There's automate exploration, which makes the unit move automatically, and the final order is Circling back to Alert, it's good for playing defensively, like putting them on unfriendly borders or garrisoning them in cities. That's a much better role for a unit like the Ranger. Ranger is a catch-all term for every sniper, sport gunner, mortar team, and anti-tank crew. Pretty much any unit that can attack from multiple tiles away and not take damage. They're pretty fragile in melee, but this can be negated by playing defensively or proper positioning. The contrast is a combat rover, which, while longer to make, has higher movement and combat strength. This thing is your ticket to making it out of the early game, with a couple of these things being able to clear out most hives. It doesn't fall off later game though. With upgrades like bonus damage to fortified or to flank units, it becomes a great frontline attacker. To understand why the combat rover is so powerful, we need to look at the other Civ games. Usually in melee, there's a rock, paper, scissors mechanic with cavalry, infantry, and anti-cavalry, which goes throughout the entire game. But Beyond Earth doesn't have any anti-cavalry. The combat rover's major weakness is it can't fortify or even benefit from defensive bonuses at all, so it will quickly die if used defensively. The missile rover is another ranged unit, but functions more like artillery, doing more damage than the ranger, but being even more fragile in melee and having set up before attacking. They do have some other mechanics like being able to shoot down satellites and being a siege unit, which means they deal bonus damage to cities. While in other Civ games, aerial units are unlocked mid to late game and have different roles, but Beyond Earth takes the inspiration from the US military and slams them all into one unit. Tac jets are stationed in either cities or aircraft carriers and have 3 orders while also being able to rebase. First thing they can do is airstrike, which works like an extended melee attack because the targets do fight back. Interception puts the unit to sleep and makes it so it attacks any hostile tac jet that airstrikes in its radius. Finally, air sweep attacks any hostile tac jet in interception mode. Moving from the air to sea, there's the gunboat, a ranged naval unit with high mobility. Naval combat is really simple because there's no terrain and boats can't fortify. Ocean and coast tiles are only different for one unit in the game that has really long legs and can walk through coast tiles. Early game, you should only use the gunboat for coastal defense, escorting units like builders and embarked units that can't fight back and are super fragile. I say this because the deeper you go into the ocean, the more you come across stuff like this. Next are civilian units, which I'm definitely not talking about now because I forgot to talk about them earlier. Civilian units have 0 combat strength and are either captured by other civilizations or straight out killed by aliens when attacked in melee. We'll be skipping over the builder because I already talked about it. The colonist expands your empire by settling new cities in a Command and Conquer-esque animation. But unlike every other Civ game, instead of directly creating a city, it forms an outpost which slowly turns into a full city. Trade convoys work more like tac jets in how they're stationed in cities and can reposition between them. Every city has an amount of trade routes it can support. Trade routes can be created internally, increasing outpost growth speed and giving yields to other cities, which can be good for helping a developing colony get on its feet, or when your capital city is so bloated that it needs constant food shipments to survive. You can trade externally with other civilizations to gain other yields in resources, or minor powers, which we'll talk about later. Throughout this chapter, you may have heard me mention unit upgrades, and there are 2 different types of unit upgrades. Promotions are gained when a unit gains enough XP from attacking or being attacked and gives you 2 options of either new recruits, which heals them for 50 HP, good for clutch moments, or discipline, which permanently makes them do more damage. Then there's actual unit upgrades, which are accessed in this tab. Usually in Civ, as you progress through the ages, units can be upgraded to better versions, but since Beyond Earth doesn't have ages, this system replaces it. While there are branching paths later, right now it's just a straight up upgrade. As an example, what's unquestionably better than army soldiers? Marines. Hoorah! When upgrading, you also have to choose between 2 more upgrades which can further define a unit's role and get really good later on. Another thing I like about the tier 1 upgrades is the visuals, and more than just them looking cool, it also does a good job of showing how you're adapting to the planet. Soldiers and rangers go from wearing spacesuits to actual body armor with better protected visors, so there's a lower chance of a single piece of shrapnel invalidating all that armor, and much less bulky oxygen tanks so they can carry more powerful weapons. The combat and missile rover were literally just repurposed to civilian vehicles but upgraded into actual military vehicles. The planet's ocean seems to be a different composition than Earth's, as the gunboat needs these big pontoons on the side, but the cruiser is actually built for the oceans. And the needle jet looks actually aerodynamic and not like something you can make in Spore in a couple minutes. There are obviously better upgrades, but as you can see, they branch off, and this is because of Affinity is the biggest change from the other Civ games. Throughout this video, you may have noticed this recurring triple axis. In the keen-eyed of you may have noticed these 3 colors. This is kind of like a bastardized political compass with 3 affinities being fuck aliens, and from the moment I understood the weakness of my flesh, it disgusted me. The level you have in each affinity is shown in the top left here, but like in real life, the more radicalized you become, the less people will like you, especially people from different ideologies. Now, there's some different reasons for which affinity to choose. You can base it off your own personal ideology, but that's lame and stupid. You can base it off their looks, and yeah, I'm not gonna pretend Supremacy hasn't inspired how I visualize sci-fi robots for the past 10 years. But the main deciding factor should be what resources are available, as every Affinity has a specific strategic resource used to build all its units and structures. Harmony uses Xenomass, Supremacy uses Ferraxite, and Purity uses Floatstone and sometimes Titanium. As I just mentioned, there are Affinity-specific units, which spice up mid to late game units, and while quite a few of them have unique roles, some of them, like these definitely not Space Marines, are just core units with better stats, but cost strategic resources to produce. Affinities lend themselves to certain playstyles with their units and upgrades, and you might think that that should have been a factor in choosing, but counterpoint, if you stick to one strategy, you're not a tactician. You're an idiot. Harmony, believe it or not, isn't swarm-based, and is almost the opposite, with some units even being buffed by being alone. The main idea of Harmony is stacking buffs to keep a unit alive, regeneration and bonus health and miasma, and also healing on kills and pillaging improvements. Also, while Harmony is the alien-themed affinity, you by no means have to coexist with him, and I'll talk about it later, but at one stage in the Harmony victory, all aliens become super hostile. Purity focuses a lot on defense, getting bonuses for not moving, and the unique units being powerful, ranged, or get defensive bonuses. Supremacy rewards real tactical thought, with bonuses to flanking and staying in formation. Rangers can shoot and scoot, and unique units are a lot more specialized, with a fragile but powerful ranged unit, and the melee unit being split into weak offense, high defense, and high offense, weak defense. All the affinities also have an ultimate unit which encapsulates their playstyles and is really powerful and cool looking. For example, the Harmony Xeno Titan is a super strong melee tank that does so much damage it counts as a siege unit. Affinity-specific unique units, unit upgrades, and buildings are unlocked by reaching specific levels of said affinity. Affinity levels are gained through quests, virtues, rare chances on expeditions, and researching technologies tagged with the affinity color, which roughly follow the triple axis pattern. Affinity shouldn't completely define your research though. For example, even if you're going full Harmony, there is still some important Purity and Supremacy techs you should get. Looking at the rest of the buttons on the bottom right, these activate different visual layers of the map. Other Civ games have a bunch of fun different visual layers that, while most are useless, some have value. Beyond Earth has only two, and they're directly linked to core mechanics. The espionage layer highlights cities and shows their levels of intrigue. It also brings up a window showing all your active spies, which can be stationed at headquarters to provide various bonuses, your cities to counter enemy spies, and of course, other civilization cities. Spies have a list of operations they can do with difficulties based on the spies' levels. Intrigue is a new mechanic that increases with successful operations and unlocks new operations. You start with minor things like stealing their mail, but can eventually build up to things like detonating a radioactive dirty bomb in a civilian center, or just a full-on takeover, among other things. The orbital layer shows all your launch satellites. Satellites are technically units, but they work so differently that I didn't want to group them with the other units. Satellites are built in cities and can't move. They have the order to launch, which brings up the orbital layer. Every city has a radius of orbital coverage that can be extended by crest rewards, certain buildings, relay improvements, or the stellar Codex Wonder. There's also the Supremacy bonus, which gives you coverage over any unimproved Ferraxite deposits. Satellites can be deployed anywhere in coverage, but can't overlap. You probably won't use satellites that much in your first couple games, but they can provide really good bonuses if you know what you're doing. The first satellite you'll probably have access to is the Miasmic Repulsor, which I'm not going to degrade your intelligence by explaining what they do. They're great for prepping an area for colonization, or even putting over an alien hive you plan to assault. There's also the opposite with the Miasmic Condenser, which is meant for Harmony and all the buffs and miasma it gives, but since satellites don't have affinity requirements, you can use them as makeshift biological warfare. A good chunk of satellites boost tile yields, starting simple with the Solar Collector, but wrapping up to stuff like the Orbital Fabricator, which can create new resource deposits. Some have military applications like the Phasal Transporter or the Orbital Laser, and later Planet Carver, which are this game's closest replacement of nukes, although you can't just put them over cities because they can be shot down. I should also mention that all orbital units have sight around them, and sometimes the intel they give is as, if not more important than their actual bonus. Quests are probably the second biggest change to the civilization formula. While there always has been quest-like mechanics, like with city-states or Beyond Earth has a full-on quest window with pop-ups and decisions. I'm sure people are angry about this, but I kinda like it. Civilization can get pretty repetitive and eye-glazy, so it's nice to constantly have new things to do. There's a reason why Medieval is one of my favorite Sims games. But if you really hate them, you can just not do them and never even open the quest window. Quest objectives are mostly simple tasks such as excavating sites, fighting aliens, setting up spy networks, raiding NPC outposts, producing specific things, and other stuff. Some quests are multi-part with tiny stories or sequential tasks quests, like these pseudo-tutorials for colonists and spies. Another mechanic related to quests are decisions, which use the quest pop-ups, but they have two things to choose from at the bottom. Sometimes decisions are directly linked to quests, like this one you get pretty early on, which gives you a quest for the affinity of your choice. Most decisions pop up after completing a building for the first time, and you can change its yields or give it other bonuses. For example, the ultrasonic fence discourages aliens from going near the city, but get the decision to either increase its range or make it so trade convoys are completely immune to aliens. There's some other stuff like, ooh, do you want the energy now or more energy income? Another big thing from decisions are where you have to choose between two trade outposts to spawn, and I guess I should finally talk about minor powers now. Although not actually, because I want to talk about something from the other Civ games. City-states are NPC-controlled singular cities with their own improvements and militaries. Diplomacy with them is much more limited than with actual civilizations, but provide exclusive bonuses and lucrative trade deals. While they are relatively weak, there's a whole network of alliances and protection deals with actual civilizations, which can always lead to some spicy geopolitical conflict. Beyond Earth throws all that out a window and pretty much lobotomizes them. You might be starting to notice a pattern here, but I want to talk about that stuff later in the conclusion, so be patient. They have no territory or standing army, and don't even have diplomacy tabs. Your only interaction with them is through traders, a couple quests, and you can also just kill them with barely any repercussions from other civilizations. The victories in this game are kinda related to the quest system, but if you already know all the steps, you can just ignore the quest tab. There are two basic victories, being domination and score. Those are the only victories that carry over from the other Civ games. Religious, diplomatic, and cultural wouldn't work because the mechanics of them just aren't in the game, and we're already on an exoplanet, so the science victory is kinda redundant, although you could technically say all the victories in this game are science because you have to research technologies and build stuff to achieve them. Every affinity has its own victory, like Harmony, where you do some avatar psychic tree stuff and become a gestalt consciousness. What's funny is that even though Harmony is all about coexistence, it makes all the aliens super hostile because you're like strapping their god to a machine. For Supremacy, you build a portal back to Earth and conquer it by force to show them how it's done. Purity is kind of like the opposite, where you build a portal to take people from Earth. You see, Purity isn't only about preserving Earth values, it's also about imposing them on this planet. A lot of Purity texts involve some form of terraforming, and bringing the Earth settlers is the final stage in creating this new Earth, or a Terra Novum, if you will. The final victory in this game is Contact, which doesn't need any prerequisites, and it's the fastest victory in the game if you get a rare chance in excavating a site that has a very low spawn rate. Although, I don't think the Beyond Earth speedrunning community is really a thing. At all. All victories, besides these two, require you to build a wonder and protect it. This wonder takes up an entire tile, and you can choose where to build it for better defense in this early test version of what would become Civ 6's wonder/district system. Now, to get a little more philosophical, none of these are really good endings. If we take the end goal being to save humanity, none of these really achieve it. While humans as a species will survive with harmony, humanity as a concept completely dies out with no free will or individuality. With Supremacy, even ignoring the whole planetary genocide, you've changed so much, can you even still call yourselves human? With Purity, you're embracing the exact same ideals that caused Earth to be like this. So what's stopping you from repeating it all over again? Although I guess you could always find a new planet to ruin. The progenitor race in Contact doesn't seem like the best to get attention of. I mean, finding sapient aliens is cool, but you may notice every single one of their structures you come across is completely destroyed. So either they're incredibly warlike or something did this to them. Nevertheless, something you shouldn't be building a big beacon telling directly where you are. Since score isn't a real victory, it's more to just stop the game from going on forever. That leaves domination, strangely, as the only good victory. Assuming you don't execute everyone, it's the only ending where you unify humanity under one flag without mind control or imposing extremist ideologies. But none of this really matters. The only reason I do this all is because I had to suffer through college-level media analysis in my junior year, so you have to too. Beyond Earth has two DLCs, and we probably won't be getting any more. The first one is the Exoplanets map pack, originally a pre-order bonus which adds a couple pre-made maps. But the main DLC is Rising Tide, a huge— Why is the game called Rising Tide if the tide doesn't actually rise? You know, in Alpha Centauri— Wow, incredible, you are so clever. Here's your Reddit gold. You're right, the entire DLC is worthless because they didn't add a mechanic which would make certain maps pointless and have barely any gameplay effects because of all the new water-based mechanics. You know how game devs do that thing where their game is doing really good, and then they start working on a minor update, but then they decide to add a couple other things they've been thinking of, maybe even some stuff the community's been asking for. Soon enough, though, it becomes a major update that gets a full post on Steam, but then they ask, why stop there? And start adding more, and keep making promises. Next thing you know, it's a huge update that's going to completely change the game, and multiple years later, there's no new actual content, and the game is dead. Actually, I think that applies to things other than games. Anyway, Rising Tide is like that if it actually worked. It was originally supposed to just be an expansion to water, which it does really well with new naval units, oceanic resource tiles, amphibious units, ocean archaeology, ocean improvements, and even aquatic cities. But then they went further with stuff like quality of life, archaeology, a completely new resource with a bunch of new mechanics linked to it, 3 new affinities, and a complete rework of the diplomacy system from the ground up. This DLC makes the base game seem unfinished, and is why I didn't even mention things like diplomacy earlier in the video, because they suck compared to Rising Tide. If this video convinced you to buy this game, you should honestly just buy Rising Tide and never even bother with the base game. I always say with games that have huge DLCs to play the base game at least once, but with Beyond Earth, there is literally no reason to play the base game. It sucks compared to Rising Tide. Now, some of you may be like, you have to pay more money on top of the base game to make it good? That's stupid. And yeah, I'm not gonna bring up how the game and DLC combined are cheaper than most modern games because it is pretty stupid. Now time for a very frantic overview of the DLC. Starting with the aquatic stuff, some existing units become amphibious, meaning that they don't enter a transport when they embark, so they can do things. A trade convoy and boat were combined into one unit. The worker can build most improvements on water tiles and exploit new aquatic resources. Explorers fight back and can analyze new underwater archaeology sites with another cool animation. Finally, the colonists can now settle ocean cities, so let's talk about those. Unless you're playing as one of the 2 new sponsors, your first city can't be in the ocean. Ocean cities have some interesting quirks though, the primary one being that their borders don't grow naturally, so they can only be expanded by purchasing or by moving the whole damn city. It's a production project that moves a single tile and takes a couple turns to do. For the completely new units, there's the patrol boats, which are cheaper to produce and move really quickly, so they're great for early game power, map exploration, and harassing larger targets. The submarine is really good in this game. It's alright in the other games, but it really excels against even the biggest aliens because they have no object permanence whatsoever. They can even be useful late game with various damage bonuses. There's also a whole slew of early to mid game orbital units that really should have been in the base game, like the Spy Satellite or the Paeon, which provides health yields. Non-colossal aquatic aliens have been reworked to spawn in nests like their land-dwelling brethren. Rippers are added as the new main aquatic alien to ease you into aquatic combat instead of dropping you to the deep end with the much stronger sea dragons. This is also added to land with the new Scarab unit, which, no, doesn't fly, it's just a weaker version of the wolf beetle. The Makara is an amphibious unit which works as kind of a mini colossal alien. Hydrocorals are more of a passive threat because they can't attack or even move, but they have really high strength and can spread to other tiles. They exist to block tiles, and you can only really get rid of them by chipping away with gunboats. Once you finish an archaeology site, pick up a resource pod, or clear an alien nest, there's now a chance to get an artifact. Artifacts can be turned directly into resources, but you can mix and match 3 to unlock various powerful wonders and bonuses, like, well, I wanted to give an example of a really powerful one, but they're all really good ones. Also, there's a Half-Life 3 reference. How contemporary. Explorers can now leash aliens, which puts them under your control permanently at the cost of the explorer's health. It's good for some emergency defense, but later on with the proper technology and a Harmony Affinity, you can leash colossal aliens. Marvels are a completely new mechanic that are linked to the quest system. In every game, there will be a single large marvel that will trigger a quest line for every civilization once found. For the quest, you have to find smaller versions of it and interact with them. Once completed, you can get some bonuses globally or around the small ones. This bonus applies to only one empire, and the smaller ones can only be interacted with once, so there is a competitive side to them. Diplomatic Capital is a completely new resource on the top bar that has a bunch of new mechanics. Diplomatic Capital is gained from wonders, certain buildings, and the black market. Spies can now be assigned to the black market to buy or sell strategic resources for Diplomatic Capital. Another thing it can be used for are personality traits, which are another completely new mechanic, which can be accessed in the completely new diplomacy window. I told you there would be a lot of new stuff. Personality traits are boosts that you can buy and upgrade with Diplomatic Capital. They're divided between boosts for cities, military units, and whatever else they could throw in politics. It's pretty easy to completely forget about them and only remember during the mid-game health death spiral so you panic buy developer. Diplomatic Capital is also used in the completely new diplomacy system. Diplomacy is built off of 2 numbers, being respect and fear. Fear is a comparison of your total military strength. Respect is increased or decreased by certain actions you do in the game and how they view them. You can see how they react with future Twitter up here and see the passive-aggressive hate mail they send. There are 5 stations of relationship with sanctioned, neutral, cooperating, allied, and war. Relations can be set by having a certain level of one of the 2 numbers. The normal civilization trade system is gone and replaced with trade agreements. Trade agreements are purchased and sold between civilizations with Diplomatic Capital. Agreements you have available to sell are based on your personality traits, and higher relationships increase the boost they give. The 3 new affinities are hybrids between the main 3 that you have to progress in both affinities to get. They have some really powerful units, and it's fun to see all the logical hoops they jump through to try to rationalize them. Okay, wow. I told you that was a lot, but it's done now. Civilization has always had some of the best music, thanks in no small part to the legendary Christopher Tin. But Beyond Earth departs from the traditional Civilization music, in a good way. Let me explain. The mainline Civilization games are based in history, so the music is always grand, and in ancient languages like Latin or Swahili. But Beyond Earth is in the uncertain future, so the music is more mysterious and experimental. Music adapts to the gameplay as well, like with different tracks for biomes. The music also gets more intense when you're in a war or encounter a colossal alien. But my favorite is how there's separate tracks for different stages in the game, and it goes from this very mysterious early game to intense late game where you're racing to get a victory. Even ignoring the game, it's just good music overall, and it's great to turn on in the background while doing things, or put in the background of a YouTube video. Because this game was made before saying that players should own their games was controversial, it has all its files out on display. We already talked about editing XML in the beginning, where you can change data for some funky result. All the music is also in there as MP3 files, which, yeah, you can just copy them into an audio player. But the coolest stuff is in these asset files. I got into all this stuff when I wanted to get the loading screens, but since no one plays this game, finding them online was impossible, and screen capping wasn't exactly an option. So I ended up going through a bunch of sketchy websites to get a program that can unpack these files, and they have everything. Most of them are like this, and some of them are Civ 5 unit icons? Yeah, I wasn't lying when I said this game was a hyper-modified version of Civ 5. In fact, aliens are still called barbarians in the files. If you want some actual game-changing stuff, you gotta look in the Steam Workshop. And there's a lot of stuff in there. It's obviously nowhere as close to how passionate the Civ 5 modding community is, but yeah. There's a lot of stuff, from visual changes to completely new buildings. There's some unused content like the submarine's minefield. There's also some balance changes that can range from making hybrid affinity units available earlier, all the way to complete reworks of the tech and virtue trees. There's also a bunch of sponsor mods with various levels of effort and balance. What? Even in my attempt to be a vanilla friendly, I've picked up a couple mods. I'll be the first to admit that I was looking back at this game with heavily rose-tinted glasses. You can even see how I realized this throughout the script writing process, going from, I added this part so I could call it a review and not glazing, to now. Beyond Earth went and ripped out a bunch of mechanics integral to the Civilization series. But with all that being said, it's still one of my favorite Civ games. And even if you don't agree with me, like most of the Civ community, you have to admit how influential this game was. I already talked about the victory wonders and how they directly led to Civ 6's wonder/district system, but there's also a bunch of other stuff, like the consolidation of trade boat and convoys into one unit, or the GDR. And yes, I obviously know that the GDR was in Civ 5, but in that it was a melee unit, and well, as the Civilopedia describes it, a modern armor unit on steroids. While the Civ 6 one is ranged and walks through shallow water, just like Supremacy's ultimate unit. Also in the ill-fated Battle Royale mode, you get picked up by a Beyond Earth lander. I thought that was pretty cool. Also, I don't have any beef with Alpha Centauri or its fans. I never played it, but it looks pretty cool from what I've seen. The problem lies in how most of the hate for this game seems to be coming from Alpha Centauri fans, treating Beyond Earth like an existential threat attempting to replace Alpha Centauri. But can't, like, both games exist at once? But yeah, I understand that this isn't the most popular Civilization game, and for understandable reasons. But it still has a special place in my heart, and it might be like 80% nostalgia. But I should clarify that being a subpar Civilization game by no means it's not a good game. Sid Meier's games have always been part of my life, so I don't know. Maybe one day I'll do a dedicated Sid Meier's Pirates video.